All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're just going to be looking at the review for your quiz that will be posted on Tuesday, March 23rd. So I just kind of wanted to run through these problems, but definitely look at your notes for these different sections. Feel free to look at the Delta Math examples. All these questions are going to be coming from Delta Math. So if you've been doing your Delta Math, you should be in good shape. But let's kind of do a rundown, kind of refresh our memories on some of these different types. So the first section you're going to see is factoring the difference of perfect squares. I sloppily wrote the perfect squares up here on the right just to kind of get our memory. But remember, difference of squares, the general form, you have two squares you're subtracting. You're going to have a plus b, a minus b. So really your first goal is to figure out what your a is going to be and what your b is going to be. So you want to ask yourself, first off, what times itself would give us 121? You can look at your list of perfect squares. So 11 squared is 121 if you look at like the notes that I posted earlier. So we're going to have 11. Remember, x squared is really x times x. So 11x times 11x would give you that 121x squared. Then we have 64. If you look on our perfect squares, you should see that 8 squared is 64, so that would just be 8. So then you're just going to put it in this general form. So it's a plus b, so 11x plus 8. And then you do a minus b, so 11x minus 8. And that is your answer. But you want to make sure you're figuring out what your a and your b are, and then just putting it in this form. All right, the next section you're going to see is factoring by grouping. So remember, you want to put your first two pieces together and your second two pieces, like your last two pieces together. Make sure you include the sign for like that. That should be like a negative 26x. So just make sure when you're drawing your parentheses, you include the signs, or because that could throw you off. But we want to start by figuring out the GCF of our first group. So that's 2x cubed. Remember, that's 3x's. And then 3x squared is 2x's. So if you look, they've got 2x's in common. I mean, there's really nothing you can do with a 2 and a 3. I guess technically you could pull out a 1, but nothing really bigger than that. So x squared is going to be our GCF. So you're going to divide those by x squared to see what goes on the inside. Or you could look at, like, what do you have left? We have 2x left over. And then for this part, we just have a 3. Okay. For our next part, we have negative 26x minus 39. If you kind of do a factor tree, you would see that this is 13 and 2. This is really 3 and 13. If you try to divide, maybe, I know these are kind of a little bit bigger numbers than probably what you'll actually see on your quiz. But if you look, they've got a 13 in common. And also, they've also got a negative in common. So we can plot a negative, because if you look, what I'm trying to get, remember, when I do this second group, I do want to get 2x plus 3, like on the inside. Like that's my goal. I want these to be the same. So if I plot a negative 13, just kind of double check. If you divided these by negative 13, would that give you what I want? Like a negative over a negative, that would be positive 2x. And then negative 39 divided by negative 13 would be a positive 3. So sometimes you will have to pull out a negative, so just kind of be on the lookout for that if you're trying to get these to be the same. So our final answer, you put these outside GCFs in a group, so x squared minus 13, and then you just copy one of those groups that were the same, so 2x plus 3. And this would be your answer. All right, so section 3, we're going to be looking at trinomials. There's going to be one of these questions that is, in my opinion, easier or less work. And then there's going to be one question like what we did most recently at the end of last week. So first thing I would do in these questions is list your A, B, and C. So since our A is 1, I mean, technically you do A times C. This would be still 41 times 40 is 40. Your B would go on the bottom. So we're trying to think of something that multiplies to 40 and adds up to negative 13. So maybe just to kind of help us with this, but 8 times 5 is 40. Remember, there's two ways to multiply to 40, though. You can have two positives or you can have two negatives. So since we wanted to add up to negative 13, we would make both of these negatives. So negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40, and it does also add up to negative 13. So since our A is 1, we don't have to do grouping. So I can just write my answer as x minus 8, x minus 5. So we don't have to do all that extra stuff we saw last Friday. But so since A equals 1, no grouping. I mean, you could do grouping. If you did do it, you'd still get the right answer, but you're doing extra work. All right. So let's look at a little bit more of a challenging one, because if you see in this next question, our A is 3, so it's not 1. So that means we need to do the grouping process. So if we multiply our A times our C, that would be 15. Our B goes on the bottom. So what multiplies to 15 and adds up to 16? Well, that would be 1 and 15. Don't forget, you can always do 1 in itself. Like that's sometimes I feel like this is an easy thing to forget. I miss it sometimes. So we can't just write our answer as x plus 1, x plus 15. Since our A is 3 or it's not 1, we have to do this grouping process. So we're going to rewrite the original problem. Instead of writing 16x, I'm going to break it apart to the two factors we just got. And now this is just like a grouping problem, like we saw like in section 2. So we're going to group up the first two pieces, and we're going to group up the last two pieces. So we want to figure out the GCF of our first group would be, well, I really have 3xx and 1x. So the only thing they really have in common is an x. So if I divide by x, or if I look at what I have left over, I have 3x. And I just have 1. And then for my next one, my next group, sorry, I have 15x and 5. Well, I mean, that's 5 times 3. So they got a 5 in common. So if you divide by 5, or if you look what's left over, we have a 3 and an x, so that would be 3x. There's nothing left over here, or 5 divided by 5 would really be 1. So if there's like, if you circle everything, you really still have a 1 as its placeholder. But you see how we got 3x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, that's great. That means we did it correctly. So we put our GCFs together. And then we just bring down one of those 3x plus 1 groups. That would be our answer. So this is what your quiz will look like on this section 3. Just pay attention. I'm going to give you one question where A is 1 and one question where it is not. So pay attention to which question is which, so you don't end up doing a lot of extra work you don't need to do. But let me know if you have any questions.